Welcome back to another amazing episode of the Plan Your Federal Retirement podcast. I'm your host, Micah and with me, as usual, is the amazing Tammy Flanagan. Tammy, how's it going, ma'am?
It's going great, Micah. I'm ready to talk about some money issues today, so this will be an interesting one.
Some money things. It's always a good day. I know. Something about the
St. Patrick's Day. Whoops.
It is, right? Yeah, it's the green thing, right? We're always talking about money. It's almost like it's a retirement podcast where money is kind of a key part of that.
That's right. That's right. This is a good time of year. Plus, it's getting closer and closer to tax time. So another thing when people's minds start turning to money issues. How do we pay less taxes?
And that's such a great question, right? Because there's two ways to look at it. There's a traditional way that we look at it, which I'm going to lump a lot of CPAs and tax preparers in, and not so much in a negative thing, but this is like what they hear from their clients a lot is how do I pay less taxes? But what the CPA is looking at is their current tax return, right? They're looking at what taxes they paid last year, and they're saying, how do I lower my taxes for last year? Which is a fair question. And then if they go a little further, how do I lower my taxes for this year? That's another fair question. But Tammy, I think the better question is, how do I lower my taxes over the next 30 years? Because now all of a sudden we're playing a different game.
Yep. And it's kind of hard to predict all of that, not knowing what the tax laws are going to say in the next 30 years. So you have to kind of play with what you know today and then prepare for changes in the future, because obviously things do change in the area of taxes, probably even more frequently than in the area of benefits.
Oh, yes. Taxes change a lot more frequently than benefits, depending on what Congress wants to do or not do. Or even maybe it's not tax law change, it's just IRS interpretation of the law changes, right? And so then that can create a whole other subset of fun planning dilemmas that we have to work through. So what we wanted to really chat about today is Tammy, we've gone through on a previous podcast a whole lot about federal benefits, right? Which are great. There's so many great ways that you have federal benefits, but there's kind of two segments to your retirement income. There's what we call our fixed income, right? Which is going to be some type of pension income that's going to come in. Your FERS benefits, maybe Social Security, we'll chat lightly about that one. And that'll come up with some portion of your retirement income. Then we have what I call the variable retirement income, right? Which that's the other monies that we have, IRAs, Roth IRAs, TSPs, etc. So this would be a fun question to say is what money should we put where? If we know we're saving for the future, how much should we put into IRAs versus the TSP, into Roth versus traditional, versus what about a non-retirement account as well, right? There's all these different options that are out there. So I guess we should start first kicking off a little bit about pension plans and briefly, how do they fit in this mix? Then maybe talking about the other piece of it.
That sounds good, Micah, because I know with FERS, the Federal Employees Retirement System, you've got three pieces to it. And like you said, two of the pieces we can figure out, believe it or not, pretty simply and pretty accurately. It's that third piece that really is, like you said, flexible. It fluctuates. We're not always as well educated as we need to be to understand how to manage it. So I think this is going to help a lot of people today to get some basics of how to manage that thrift while you're working, how to build the wealth that you're going to need for those of you who want to retire at a younger age. Because the solution to every problem when it comes to retirement planning is if you can't afford to retire today, all you got to do is work a little longer, but nobody seems to like that solution.
No, when we get in our mind that this is the date we want to retire, and then somebody says we need to work a little longer, it's a bit painful, isn't it?
It is, because you want to do what you want to do, that's for sure.
So whenever we do retirement plan, yes, let's make it happen, right? Now, Tammy, whenever you and we look at it from slightly different angles, but we're always going the same direction, right? You're looking at it more from the federal benefits piece. How is that going to put together? And then I'm looking at it from the federal benefits piece and the other pieces that are out there. How does everything jive? And that's one of the reasons I love doing the podcast with you, right? We're always pointing that same direction and having two different views on it. So, but regardless of we start in two different ways, we're always starting with the same thing, which is how much a month does somebody want in retirement income? Because that's kind of the nut that we're solving for at the end of the day, right?
And sometimes is the need the same as the want? Because sometimes if you're not happy in retirement, if you don't have enough money to do what you want to do, that hurts. So I think the need and the want should line up pretty closely.
Yeah. So if you're not doing that, Oh, boy, well, you just nailed it. I was just about to go there. So, yes, you got to make sure these get lined up. And if you got to look at it today and say you're not happy with your current spending, where people make mistakes, and I have seen people do this, where we get all of their retirement planned and they come in and they say, well, Micah, we want to retire on, $6,000 a month in retirement income, which is great. They have $6,000 a month now. They're going to have $6,000 a month retirement income. It's passing my straight face test. We work towards that for several years. Then the day of retirement, this is a true story, the day of retirement, as we wrap their meeting up, as they're walking out, the wife turns around and looks at me and says, you know what, Micah, I think we want $9,000 a month going forward, not $6,000. And it's just like she smacked me in the face with a sledgehammer, right? I'm like floored by this conversation. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way. And again, as she's walking out the door, she makes this comment. And I got to like reel her back in. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way. This isn't a magical spigot that we could turn anything on. We've been working on this dollar amount for years. We've been adjusting your cash flow. We've been paying things off. We've been doing all of these things based on this $6,000 a month. You can't just magically ask for 50% more. You don't have the money to do that. So Tammy, to your point, and maybe I need to look at this and say, where did I fail in not asking the right questions? That's a fair comment. But this is a real conversation. You got to be honest that if you're planning for a number and you're working with a planner, you're working with your spouse or anybody else, you got to be open and transparent from the get-go if you think that's a good number or the wrong number. Because whatever number you think about is what your advisor, what your financial planner, what your coach is going to help you do. And if you give them the wrong number, you're just setting yourself up for failure.
Yep. And I think it's sometimes you have to ask yourself so many questions, such as, do we want to travel in retirement? Is our house paid off? Are we going to pay it off? So there's so many different variables that can change that dollar figure from one thing to the other. So maybe she just decided she wants to take a couple of trips around the world or something and didn't plan for that financially.
Yeah. And as you see my stress level just rising right by this. Yes, because I'm like gripping my desk tighter like that's going to do something. But these are things that come up and we got to think about these in advance. So when we're thinking about that desired income, it's awesome. How much money do we want to have in day-to-day living just to pay the bills? Then how much do we want to have, Tammy, you nailed it. How much do you want to have in a travel budget? And again, in my cash flow thing, I like travel as a separate expense. How much travel do we want to do? Let's set up a travel account. Let's put money in there every single month. And it's good news. Whenever you have money in there, go travel, go do the things you want. But learn to know what that dollar amount is. It's not about being a penny pincher on this, but you need to know where your money's going in retirement. That's such a key and a critical concept in retirement. Before we can ever get to the fund planning stage, you need to know where your money's going.
That's right. And also, even though you're retiring from your full-time career, if you did want something extra like that, maybe for the first 5 or 10 years of your retirement, when you're still in those go-go years, there's nothing wrong with having a part-time job. Or like I have a cousin of mine who works for the state legislature just during the session from January to April till they go out of session. And that makes enough money for her to take a nice trip in the summertime. Perfect. So she solves that problem by adding some income to what she knows is her basic retirement income. And it works for her. And eventually she's not going to be doing the traveling and she won't have to do the work then either.
Yeah, it works out really great, right? Being intentional. So it's always number one, start with how much money you want in retirement income. And then once we have that, right, whatever that dollar amount is, then we start looking at kind of the pension incomes that come in. And Tammy, you had put an interesting question in our outline, so I'll ask it to you. We know we have a pension income, which is your federal benefit, right, which you can control that a little bit. It's based on your length of service and your high 3, so you can work a little bit longer, it'll be higher. But then What about Social Security? Do you consider Social Security a pension?
I don't consider it a pension by virtue of the definition of a pension where it's an employer-sponsored benefit, but it is a defined benefit, just like your FERS retirement, because it's based on 2 defined factors, your salary and how long you've paid into it. And there's, of course, the formula, which is like there is under FERS. It's just a different formula. So these are things, both FERS and Social Security, that we can get a pretty good handle on how much it's going to be worth, what's going to cause it to be reduced, what's going to be withheld from it, is it taxable, is part of it tax-free? So we can really get that down to a pretty solid number when we've chosen our retirement date, when we say, okay, for sure, we're leaving at the end of June of 2024. Now we can start figuring out what that defined benefit or both of those are if I'm over 62. And if you're not over 62 under FERS, you might be getting a FERS supplement, and then you have to factor that into it. But Micah, I wonder when we have this new retirement system, FERS, new retirement system, it's 30 years old, but this system that doesn't provide a cost of living adjustment until you're 62. When somebody tells me they're going to retire at 57 under FERS, I start to get a little bit worried because I'm not sure that they understand the lack or loss of a COLA for 5 years, what that can really do, especially right now, because we're in this sustained period of high inflation. And I think people are hurting whenever they look at, everything else going up by 10% and their paycheck from retirement is staying the same. And that's something you really have to give consideration to as well. And maybe somehow you can plan for that. I'm sure you can, but it's something that a lot of people weren't aware of until we started having higher inflation.
And Tammy, I would say it goes a little bit further, if I may, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but I don't think it's just that you get a 0% cost of living adjustment from 57 to 62. Most of the time you get a negative cost of living adjustment because your expenses go up, your healthcare goes up, right? Your net pension goes down between 57 and 62 almost every year because your health insurance goes up. Well, if my net pay goes down, I'm kind of looking at that as a negative cost of living adjustment. So with my retirees, you're 100% right. From whatever retirement age to 62, we count on their pension decreasing every single year because they're going to have other things that will go up. Maybe their life insurance is going to go up, when they hit 60 years old. Okay, that's an additional expense that's going to go up. Their health insurance is going to go up, right? All of those other things make your net pay goes down, which is one of the critical things in planning. You always have to be looking at what your net pay is. How much net income do you want? And what's your net pension, your net Social Security?
Right. Yeah, those are things that are kind of hard to put your mind around until you actually start to experience it. But then it's too late. It's like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize how much it was going to hurt that the health benefit plan went up in price and now my retirement's, staying the same. But like you said, it actually gets less every month in the bank because that other expense just went up. So those are things, that's where benefit really lays the foundation for financial planning. Because you really got to understand those 5-year changes in FEGLI coverage. If you're carrying option B and you want to maintain it, it's going to go up every 5 years. Absolutely. And right about the time you want to retire, it starts to double in price. So, then you have to figure out, now what do I do? So there's a lot to it. And that's why we spend so much time talking about it. And I love this too, that we kind of lay this foundation with benefits, and you and I both understand benefits really well. And then I love it because the financial planning piece is so critical. And that's where a lot of people think, oh, why do I need to do financial planning? Why do I need to do tax planning when I've gotten away for 30 years without doing it? But it's critical. It's really an important step.
So, Tammy, in our 3-part stool that we have, right, we've talked about 2 of them already. We talked about your pension and we talked about your Social Security, right, which is another way of looking at a pension. Sure, it's not the technical definition, but it kind of is a pension income. Neither one of those are going to keep up with inflation, right? Both after 62 have a cost of living adjustment. But number one, FERS is on a diet COLA. You're going to get 1% less than CPI. It's a little formula, right? But in essence, it's 1% less is what we bank on. And then Social Security, in my opinion, doesn't keep up with inflation either. So neither one of those pensions, neither one of those sources of income you have will keep up with inflation. So really what that's going to rely on is our third bucket, which you got to be really cognizant of, which is what we call your variable retirement income, or your savings, right? Your TSP, your IRAs, your Roth, these other monies that you have. This is why it's such a critical piece in your retirement plan. We talk about how critical it is to get your SF50s in order, to know your certified summary of federal service, to know these things to get your pension. And it is, that's super, super critical. But if you're not putting equally, if not more attention on your investments to help grow, you could run into quite an issue in retirement.
And that's the one part of your retirement you can influence. You can't really influence what's going to happen with your FERS benefit or what Congress is going to do to Social Security, but you can certainly influence how much you set aside, how you manage that, how you tolerate risk by investing in things that may have an element of risk, but have the possibility of doing better than inflation. And that's what we're looking for, to maintain, if not outpace, what's happening with higher prices.
Now, this is going to be a bit of a three-part series we're talking about. So here we're going to talk about, choosing retirement plans and which ones you should contribute to. Next episode, we're going to be talking about the foundations of a financial plan, other pieces. Then we're going to be moving into retirement distributions. It's a little bit of a tease of how do you use this in retirement. But before we can get to how to use it in retirement, we got to talk about how the money's actually going to get into the accounts. Now, this episode is airing on April 10th before tax day. Why is that so important? Because you still have time to go backwards and look at last year, that's 2022, and max fund an IRA or a Roth IRA. Now, there's income limits on how much people can put into a Roth IRA. If your income's over a certain threshold, $204,000 and change, you cannot contribute to a Roth IRA. However, everyone is eligible to contribute to an IRA. There's no income limitations on that. And so that's something you really want to take a peek at. Does it mean it's right for everybody? No, I'm not saying that whatsoever. But I do think everyone should look at this, look at your cash flow. And if you didn't max fund a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA for last year, maybe you should look at that. Maybe we should be thinking about making a max contribution. And last year that was $6,000 plus an extra $1,000 catch up for a total of $7,000 for 2022 that you can still put in until tax day.
Now, is the catch up contribution that you can make for an IRA the same as the TSP where you can do it the year you turn 55?
You got it. The 50. Yes, the year you turn 50, you can turn it on. So if you were, again, 50 at the end of last year, doesn't matter when you turn 50, it could have been on 12/31, you were still 50 at the end of the year, you're still eligible for a 2022 catch-up contribution. Same with this year. If the end of this year, anytime in this year you turn 50 years old, you're eligible for the full catch-up contribution for not only the TSP, but in addition to the IRAs, which is great. Now, why am I talking about IRAs right now? We'll talk about TSPs in a second, but IRAs are the only ones we can go backwards and put money into. Our TSP accounts, we can't. It's only money going forward, which is fantastic. But right now, if you haven't topped off those IRAs for last year, you might want to take a look at that and say, hey, should I be putting money into there last year? I think, Tammy, one of the misconceptions I get from my clients that are close to retirement is they're going to say, hey, Micah, you know what? I'm retiring next year. I normally fund my Roth IRAs, but since I'm retiring in a year, should I stop putting money in my Roth IRA? That's a good question. And I think we're looking at it wrong, though. It's not just when am I retiring? Sure, you're retiring in a year, but it also comes to a question, when are we going to use this money? And the other thing that investments have a really good job of doing, when you put money in investments, you have less money to spend. So it helps on the cash flow side, right? If I put $7,000 in a Roth, I don't have $7,000 in my bank account. It's going to help with my cash flow and my spending. So sometimes it's a forced savings plan, helps us spend less. So I like it from that nature. And then I also like it from the nature, just because, and Tammy, forgive me, I'm up on my soapbox here. I know you know this, but just because we're retiring next year doesn't mean we need to pull everything out of the stock market next year. We still have a long life, right? 30 plus years probably in retirement. How are we going to have that money grow for us? And as we were just talking about, the only tool we have at our disposal to outpace inflation is our investments. That's our TSPs, our IRAs, our Roth IRAs, or other investment savings invested for the long term. That's our only hope without pacing inflation, because we know by facts that FERS and Social Security will not keep up with inflation.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to when we talk about taking that money out, because like we're setting up this IRA outside of our TSP account, and we're also saving money set aside for those vacations or that new car or whatever else we're saving money for in cash. Now, when we're retired, we got to figure out which area do we take that from? Do we take it from the Roth IRA first, or we save that for last and let that tax-free savings continue to grow? So I think that's another place where people are going to find this very interesting to figure out what order do we start using this money that we've saved. And the other thing I've seen with clients is they don't want to use it at all. Like they're trying to live on just the defined benefit. They got their FERS benefit, their Social Security, and they're like, okay, we're just going to live on this amount. It's less than what we were bringing home, and we're going to have to scrimp and save. But boy, if I start spending that savings, it's going to run out. So I think if we save enough and we have a plan, we're not afraid to start spending it, because that's what we saved it for. We're retiring. That's our retirement savings account by name.
100%, right? So, and I think clients are worried about it because they don't know how to take money out. What if the market goes down, or it's a rainy day fund, right? What if I need that money in the future? And what really helps with this is if we have a plan that not if, when the market goes down, what are we going to do? Last year, the market was down 19%. I'm sure somebody will correct me, right? That's pretty close. That's an ish number, right? But it's around 19% decline in 2022. Okay, the market was down. What was your plan if you were retired? Now, if you're not retired, great. We need to come up with a plan that when the market is down, how are we going to take distributions? There's still a good way you can do it in down markets. So yes, we'll have to just tease people with that because we're going to talk about it in a couple of episodes, which will be fantastic. So we talked about contributing. So I would definitely say Roth contributions, IRA contributions, if you haven't topped off for last year, make a ton of sense. Tammy, what are your thoughts on TSP contributions for this year? Because the limits changed for those as well, right?
It has. And I still meet people almost on a daily basis that still think it's 10,000 a year, or, they have some number in their mind or some percentage of pay that they're supposed to be saving, and they've lost track of these annual increases that we see. Because this year we're up to $30,000 if you're 50 or older, between
$30,000. That's huge.
Yeah. So if you're able to do that, why wouldn't you put that money aside, lower your taxes now if you're doing the traditional thrift? Now, not everybody can do 30,000 because you have to be in that catch-up contribution age bracket of turning 50 or older. But even if you're not, it's still $22,500 now. It's not $10,000 anymore. It's gone way up from there. And so you want to check your payroll deduction. Make sure you're maximizing what it is you can save. And if you haven't changed that for a couple of years, maybe it's time to up it. Maybe it's time to increase it. We just got a pretty decent pay raise in January if you're a federal employee. So take even 1% of that and put it towards your thrift, because we were looking at some numbers before we started. And even though we have close to 100% of FERS employees participating in the thrift, because every FERS employee gets an agency automatic 1%, and every FERS employee starts off putting 3% in their TSP account, but we only have 85% of the FERS population doing enough to get the full government match. And that's a little bit disappointing, because without doing 5%, how are you going to retire? That's, to me, that would be the minimum I would want to do. And then from there, I would increase it as much as possible, especially if my goal is to be a GS 13, 14, 15. That's the category where Social Security is going to level off, because Social Security is geared more to benefit the lower wage earner. So if you're in those higher income brackets, you're not going to get as much income replacement from your Social Security benefit, which means you're going to rely even more heavily on those savings, the thrift plan, IRAs, 401ks, whatever it is that you're doing to save for retirement.
100% agree. Tammy, I would push a little bit harder. I know we got this big pay increase last year. I like a 50-50 rule. 50% of any unexpected money you have, you should be saving for the future. So if you got a 7% cost of living adjustment, I want half of that, 3.5%. pushed in there. If you get a step increase, I want half of that step increase. If you go up and pay for any reason, I want half of that pay increase, stick it to the future. Now, why do I say half? Well, you're not used to the money today anyways, right? So let's get it going towards the future. And that also leaves the other half to come to the bottom line. It's okay to get a pay raise, to have a little bit more money today to help pay the bills, to help do fun things, to go spend money. That's okay, as long as we're also saving for the future at the same time. So I love that 50-50 rule with new monies we have coming in.
That's true. Yep. It has to be a balance, I guess, in everything in life. I was even thinking as we were talking. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was thinking about, this whole idea of, when you want to retire and how much money you need, and you can't have it all, right? It's almost like, I was thinking of somebody buying a house. It's like, oh yeah, I love that house in that perfect neighborhood, and it's got 4 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms and everything. Then you find out the price and you're like, uh-oh, we better start paring down our wish list. And I think it's the same thing with retirement. You have this dream of what retirement's going to look like, and it's going to happen when I'm 55 years old. And you start to crunch the numbers and you realize, well, maybe that's not realistic. So we have to adjust our expectations. So I think a lot of retirement planning is give and take, and planning for the unexpected, and understanding what are the what ifs. What if I stay a little longer? What if I became disabled? What if I save more in my thrift? So it's a balancing act.
It is. It is really a balancing act. And again, we're going to talk about distribution plans and the financial plan kind of in a future episode, kind of putting these pieces together. But especially for our younger listeners, I'm going to say save more, right? Now, there could become a time where you've saved enough. Well, fantastic. Let's cross that bridge when we come to it. But right now, it's a question about making sure we get that money in and make sure it's working for the long term. Especially with our younger savers last year, the market's off 20% off. Go buy, right? This is what I love about the TSP is you should be putting money in every 2 weeks, right? There's no reason to try to max fund the TSP in the first 6 months of the year because one of the things you lose is your match. Because your match, you have to fund the TSP equally throughout the year in order to get your match. So you want to fund that all throughout the year anyways, and that money should be focused on a long-term investments. And if that's what you're doing, when the market's going down, you're buying on a down market, this is what's going to help your TSP grow in the end. Just like we saw in '08, just like we saw in '01. No, it wasn't fun when the market was down, but when it recovers, because it always has, that's when we see that growth. So especially our younger investors, make sure you're putting that money to work.
Yeah, and if you have a fear of that, if that actually spurs a fear in you that, oh, the market's going to go down, I don't want that to happen, I'm losing money, and I get myself in this anxiety, panic mode, to me that means you just need a little more education. Because if you understand that there is risk in every investment, even in the G fund, there is risk.
Yep.
You have to manage it. In life is about managing risk. I was teaching some law enforcement employees, and it's easy to talk to them about risk because they spend every day of their career managing risk in the workplace. Now they have to learn how to manage risk in their retirement planning because there's always going to be that. But once you harness it and you understand it, you don't get afraid of it as much. You just deal with it and make that part of your plan.
It's kind of like when you're scared as a kid, think there's a boogeyman underneath the bed. And then once you look and realize there's no boogeyman under the bed, all of a sudden it's better. But turn the light on, right? And it's the same thing when we invest. We got to turn the light on. We can't be worried and say, well, what if a down market happens? Let me help you out. It's not if, it's when. It's going to happen. The question is, when is it going to happen? And what's our plan for taking money out? And so, generally, Tammy, I know we've talked about this before, but we have a 5-year rule. Any money you want to spend, any money you want to take out of the stock market in the next 5 years doesn't belong invested. Why do we say that? 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. When the market fell, it took about 5 years for the market to recover. Okay, well, if you were taking money out every single year, you would really be hurt. So again, for our younger audience, if you're not going to use this money in the next 5 years, we have time to ride out the storms. Now we're turning the light on to these down markets, right? We're saying, okay, yes, they're scary, but they're not as scary because we have a little bit of history that we can look at to say, you know what, they always have recovered.
Right. And you think about what's in those investments. If you're in the C fund, you be practical about that. You're investing in Microsoft. You're investing in, what is it called now? Meta, Facebook?
Yeah, Meta, that's right.
Yeah. You're investing in Walmart, General Motors, all things that we buy every day. Those companies are going to be there. Some of these are the most solid companies that have been there since the beginning of our market. I remember I was in college, which was a long time ago. And I had this contest in one of my, I don't know what class it was, if it was economics or what, but we were all supposed to pick a stock that we thought was going to do well. And I picked Exxon. And today, here we are all these years later, and Exxon's still there, and Exxon's still doing well.
Yeah.
So it's like some things are there for the long haul. So, I think I'm addressing that fear people have of, if we remember that one company that was really doing well in 2001, and then in 2002, it went bankrupt. I think it had another
Enron.
E for the first name.
Yeah. That's what I was worried you were going to say you picked.
Yeah, no, I didn't pick Enron, but that's what I think the fear comes from, that we think that when we're in the C fund, everything's in one company. And it's in 500 companies. And all 500 companies, if they all went bankrupt tomorrow, we got a whole lot more to worry about than
I'm not worried about your TSP at that point. We have a lot bigger issues. Your pension, everything's gone. Yes. So, all right. So hopefully that's not going to happen, right? That would be that catastrophic thing. So we're looking at this. Tammy, another question that's going to come up when people are thinking about saving is, where do I put money, right? We talked about Roth IRAs. We talked about IRAs. We talked about TSPs. I'm a huge fan of funding money into Roth accounts. I could be wrong. I think today our taxes are relatively low, historically speaking, and more than likely our taxes are going to increase over time. If that's going to be the case, I like to pay my taxes today and get as much growth as I can tax-free. And that's where a Roth comes in. Pros and cons on this side. So if you're kind of those, you know what, you're kind of 50-50, you don't know what to do both. There's no rule that says you have to put all of your money in the TSP in traditional or in Roth. You can split it up a little bit. Now, especially if you've been putting like this year, $30,000 away pre-tax, you're getting a pretty healthy tax deduction, which is fantastic. If you move all of that into a Roth, I am going to be off your Christmas list because your tax bill is going to be higher. Your net income is going to be less, right? Because you're paying another $9,000-10,000+ a year in taxes potentially. And so one of the things you got to think about is whenever we're contributing to a Roth, what net effect is that going to have? So it could be something, if you've never done a Roth before, start with a few $1,000. Start putting money over into that account. Start that 5-year clock that Roth IRAs, Roth TSPs have. You got to leave the money in there for 5 years before you can take it out without a penalty. Start that clock going for you, and start having that money grow for you tax deferred and eventually becoming tax free.
Right. And sometimes I'll run into people, and this is kind of the other end of the spectrum, somebody who's saving $30,000 a year, they're getting close to retirement and they want to know, what more can I do? How can I save more? And of course, one way would be to put money to fund an IRA rather than just the TSP. But then sometimes I'll even say to them, hey, maybe consider shifting some of your contributions to the Roth option. So it's going to feel like you're saving more because you're not getting as much of a tax break, but you're setting aside that pot of money that's going to be tax-free down the road. And especially for a lot of folks who have been around in government many years before the Roth, they never took advantage of it. So that could be a way to, it's not really increasing your savings so much as it's giving you another outlet for where to take money from in retirement.
I like it. Now, Tammy, today was really talking about kind of general concepts and thoughts of what to do. Now, next time we get on the podcast, I want to jump a little bit more into details on that foundations of that financial plan about how do we solve for really what you should be saving. Then that's going to tie into our distributions. But let's talk about some action items, because this podcast is all about action items for our listeners. And I'm going to say the first one, if you haven't already done it, look backwards in this next couple days before tax season is over. And if you haven't max fund your 2022 Roth or IRA, make those contributions, max fund those accounts for 2022.
Yep. And maybe another thing that people can do, especially this is for those who have that anxiety, that fear about investing. Take the time, if nothing else, go on tsp.gov and they have nice one-page fact sheets on the G, F, C, S, and I funds.
Yes.
Learn about what they're made up of. They're going to tell you what the top holdings are in those companies. A lot of times you're going to be familiar with those names. So get a little bit more education, a little bit more than you have today. It helps. I know you and I both, we learn something new every day, even when we just talk about it and we learn from each other. But I think so many employees are afraid of that because that doesn't feel like it's in their wheelhouse. But learning about that can be a little bit fun, and it's not too intimidating if you start small.
Yeah. And if you're scared about it, put it in the G fund. It's guaranteed, doesn't go down in value, right? It's not going to grow potentially as much as some other ones, but I would rather you increase your contributions. If you're scared, stick it in the G fund, because at least the money's in there, right? Now, later we can do something else with it. But if we miss the window, if we miss the opportunity to put the money in, there's no makeup. I can't go backwards in the TSP for 2022. And if I only put 15 grand in there, I can't go back and make up the difference and put more money in there. I'm capped out by the end of the pay cycle. So that's why it's really important for this year, increase those contributions if you got the cash flow for it. If you're scared about the markets, stick it in the G fund. We can have another conversation later, but at least get that money in there.
Don't stick it in there for 30 years though.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't recommend that, right? The first step is get it in. Then we can talk about the investment step. And then, Tammy, I'm going to say that the third action item for our listeners this week is work on determining what your gap is in retirement. So that gap, again, how much do we want in retirement? What's coming in fixed income, pensions, and Social Security? And what's the gap? What do we need in that variable income? What do we need to be able to pull from the TSP, from your IRAs, et cetera, to make sure you have the money you need in retirement? And if you're not quite sure how to do that, make sure you stay tuned to our next podcast. We're going to get into that a little bit more.
Right. And that's how we get our estimates too. So if we get an estimate of Social Security, go get your estimate of your federal retirement benefit, then you'll be all ready for our next session.
Perfect. Well, Tammy, as always, it's a pleasure to do these. Oh, I like that. Bring your pay stub, bring your FERS estimate, bring your Social Security statement to the next podcast. That's a great idea.
And then it'll be a workshop then.
I love it. This is going to be a lot of fun. I got to make sure I outline this to make sure we do it next time. That'll be perfect.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Tammy, these are always a lot of fun for me. Thank you so much for taking the time. And until next time, happy planning.